Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of 240Z built by me. My name's Ryan, and in this episode we're going to be finishing off this chassis jig and getting it level. Unfortunately, my phone carked it last month, and I lost a bunch of footage of me going through making up these 3 meter lengths, drilling all the holes, making up the angles. So I'm just going to take you through briefly what I've done with that. So these are the 3 meter lengths we've made up. I've drilled all the holes and attached all the brackets. The measurement for the center of each bracket, I'll go through them now. So starting at the rear is 0. The very rear is 0. 110 is the center of the first bracket. 545 the second, 1538, 2510 and 2733, and that's all in millimeters. So now these are ready, these are all tightened up and ready to level on the floor and then jack up to meet the other frames. And what I've gotten is just from my local hardware store. There are these building packers. They come between 1 and 5 mil, and I've just gotten a range of sizes, and I'm going to use these to level out the frame. These packers have a capacity of 20 tons, so more than enough for me. And if you're curious of what fixings I'm using M10 by 75s. So these packers are just, they're just like a high density plastic, and they're just different sizes. And they'll stack on top of each other. So I've spent a lot of time getting these 3 meter lengths level. I haven't recorded it because it's very fiddly and very boring. But I think they're level now. So I'm just going to do the final check, and then I'm going to mark out on the floor where the lengths are, where I put the packers as well, in case they get knocked or moved. And then we'll be ready to jack them up and weld them on. So the final check was pretty good. It's very, it's like a bee's dick out in some spots, but really not going to make a huge difference. I can play with it again once it's all together. And when I'm at the point that I'm about to cut everything out. So good news. So we'll, next step is to jack it up and start welding it in. Okay, moment of truth. I've got the 3 meter lengths, I've clamped them in one spot, on both front and back, and I've got the jack underneath pushing it up to meet the frame. Now I'm just going to start tacking and welding. Wish me luck! Alright guys, and there we have it. So it's all welded together, it's all one piece, solid as a rock. Now I'm just going to lower it down onto the ground, and we're done. Okay, so you saw me having a little think at the end there of that time lapse, and that's because I can't actually get this onto the ground because this is only a 50 mil gap and I can't get any of my jacks underneath. I tried a bunch of ways off camera and none of them were going to work, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to weld a jacking point right here. Once that's there, I'll be able to jack it up and then drop it down. So I'll weld along the sides and then along the front, and that should be strong enough just to lift one side up and lower it down to the ground. So what I've done here is I've just added a little shark fin, just a little gusset to add a little bit of strength, because when it's going to sit like that, when I lift, it's just going to add a little strength because this part's longer than where it's going to be welded. Okay, there we go, welded in. I'll give you a little look. Actually quite a challenging weld because not a lot of room and you're doing it underneath. So, pretty happy. So there we go. That's what it looks like. Actually pretty good, I think. Now, the moment of truth, we'll try and use this jacking point and lower the chassis jig onto the ground. Alright, there we go, worked. Pretty strong. So now that the chassis jig is done, my initial plan was to go through and replace the frame rails, the chassis rails and the floors just to make it stronger because it's all pretty rusty. So after cutting a hole to have a look at what the damage is in the dog legs, I realised that I can't repair the floors until I repair the inner rockers. I can't repair the inner rockers until I repair the outer rockers and the reinforcement panels and the inner wheel arches and the outer wheel arches. So it's kind of like one of those, you know, when you've got a thread in your wool jumper and you start pulling and the whole thing unravels. I'll just show you guys what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's the hole I cut in the dog leg. So what you can see here is the reinforcement panel that is basically the B pillar. It sits wedged in between the outer rocker, which is this panel here, and the inner rocker, which is behind here. And then on top of all of that, you've got the inner and outer and inner wheel arches that are also wedged in between the inner rocker and the reinforcement plate. So you've essentially got 5 layers of metal in there. And then if you include this, it's a 6th layer. So, so this here is the floor pan, and there's supposed to be an inner rocker here. Until I replace that, I can't weld the floor pan in. So it's all got to come out at the same time, basically. It's a very complex repair process. So my initial reason for wanting to replace the floor pans and the chassis rails and the frame rails was to give it some strength so that when it's on a rotisserie, it's not going to start bowing, because it's really rusted out. There's not a lot of metal in here, and I don't know whether it's strong enough to go on a rotisserie, and I don't want to bow the entire car and have it basically destroyed. So I wanted to replace all of the backbone of the car, make it nice and strong, and then put it on a rotisserie, send it for blasting. But if I have to repair all this stuff and then send it for blasting, the blasting media is going to get all into the internal cavities, and I'm going to have to try and clean that out. But I was just worried about the frame bowing on the rotisserie. So now I have decided to go with what people said initially, which was send the car for blasting on a rotisserie. I'm just going to brace the car, probably a bit more than I would have. So that leads us on to what's coming up next on the channel, which is me building a rotisserie from scratch. So why am I going to build a rotisserie instead of just buy one? The reason for that was, just like the chassis jig, I wanted to practice metal fabrication and learn how to weld, get better at welding, so that when I'm replacing panels on 1mm sheet metal, I have at least some experience. I hope you enjoyed this process of me building the chassis jig, and I hope you got some value out of it. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.